Curator of Education and Outreach here at the Orlando Museum of Art, and we're coming to you live from our current exhibition, Living Color, the Art of the Florida Highwaymen. And I'm joined today with our guest curator for this exhibition. Gary Monroe is the expert on Highwaymen art and a huge advocate for their work. And we were lucky enough to work with him and his knowledge on creating this exhibition. And so, Gary, we would love to hear more from you.
Yeah, chief cook and bottle washer of the Highwaymen. But I just want to let it be known that my mask is off by permission and request. So, Alfred Hair painting. Alfred Hair was a progenitor of the Highwaymen. It was his energy, it wasn't even a vision, it was a pure, raw, wonderful energy that enabled a cohort of 26 painters to find a better way in rural Fort Pierce in the early 1960s than what seemed to be their social destiny of picking oranges and working in the packing houses. Alfred Hair's in high school, graduates in 1961. While he was in high school, he's taking painting lessons from the regionalist painter A.E. Backus, now a well-known Florida landscape painter. And Alfred graduates high school and goes out on his own. And he took everything he learned in Backus's studio and threw it out the window, just corrupted those cherished concerns. Because his goal was not to be recognized as a great artist. His goal was to be a millionaire by his 35th birthday. And this is in 1960 for a 19-year-old African-American. So the odds did not favor that kind of success. And he figured he couldn't get the kind of money that Backus was earning at $250 a canvas. He was just out of his league. He wasn't going to get gallery representation, especially in Fort Pierce, Florida. But he figured if he can paint 10 of them in the same time that it took Backus to paint one and sell them for 1/10 the price, he'd make the same money. What he didn't bargain for, what he couldn't bargain for, was that by painting so fast, he would not just corrupt the cherished concerns of romantic landscape plein air painting, but he would sort of invent or create a fresher approach to, by then, a tired genre, which had its heyday, of course, in the 1850s, and Hudson River School, and then out west again, and history of it in Florida. And Backus was at the very tail end of that lineage. So I argue that Hair comes along and he reinvigorates the aesthetic. And this is an exceptional painting. I think it can hang alongside any landscape painting in any museum anywhere, just on the virtue of its painterly qualities. But it's a little bit atypical for Hair. Most of his paintings are more like this, very gestural, very fast, very sketchy. And I think the beauty of that was the customer, the clientele. He was selling to a middle-class audience, many of whom were coming to Florida in the afterglow of World War II, feeling successful and optimistic, buying their piece of paradise and building their typical Florida ranch-style home. And I would suspect that the reality was not as it was when they made their purchase of the land sight unseen. And you come to Florida, you build your house, but it's not on the ocean like the advertisement in New Jersey or Ohio might have suggested. And you wind up with a 2-2 terrazzo floors, jalousie windows, cantilever roof, and a carport. And you buy one of these paintings, and none of these paintings were ever sold dry. The oils were always wet. They were too much of a hurry to let them dry. And you hang one of these up, and you convert this bleak cinder block wall into a picture window onto the paradise that has always been the Florida dream. And Florida was the place to realize the American dream. But the sketchiness of the paintings, not so much this as the majority of his paintings, wasn't that they were unfinished, but they didn't tell the viewer how to respond. They sort of evoked and involved the viewer. And I spoke to many people who had bought paintings back in the day, and they would personalize the painting and tell you exactly where they were painted. And they believe it's true, but it's not, because they're painted in the artist's backyard. And as you can see, you'll see there's like 5 or 6 different motifs, and they're all handled differently. None of these paintings are the same. I heard a dealer just last week saying that it's a common scene, which is a mistake. It's not the way to look at these paintings. It's how the individual painting was handled. What he's considering common is archetypical. It's the nature of understanding Florida intuitively or viscerally. But it's how they're handled is what matters. And as I said, this is just a championship Alfred Hair painting. And I think it's from the Walker collection.
It is. Or sorry, this is the Jacobs collection.
This is from the Tim Jacobs collection. Tim was one of the earliest collectors of these paintings. He read an article and spent his honeymoon playing paintings. He's a real generous man, and I'm glad to have this in the show. And I should point out, when I was asked to curate the show as a guest of Hanson and Coralie's a stellar curatorial team at Orlando Museum of Art, we talked about how to approach it. And one idea was a smaller exhibition. And when we all realized the magnitude, which I understood, of course, what was brewing, we decided to blow it out of the water, and then we decided to, or I decided to go to the 5 primary collectors and to use their work to define what most viewers value in these paintings.
So how do you define a primary collector?
Obsessive, compulsive,
Oh.
usually wealthy, and has a lot of time on his hands, and doesn't cower from combat sport.
Sure.
But it's become a real
love. Yeah, they have a real love for these paintings.
It's a passion. It's passion driven. I know 4 of these collectors well. They're real Floridians, and I don't know about the 5th one. He's newer to the ball game, and but the connection is so deep to Florida, and to find paintings that you connect with that you know are so sublime and so true. I mean, it's just like you're coming home, you know. And so most of these collectors they're doing it almost full time. It's I shouldn't say obsession. It's a wonderful involvement. And Tim's kind of calmed down because he started this when I did 24 years ago. He bought paintings I wrote about.
So most of these are from the 1960s?
Yeah. They had their heyday from 1960 to 1980.
Okay.
Excuse me, come 1980, the business enterprise just goes dormant. I'm not sure whether it's because they saturated the market. I think it's more because the times had changed, tastes had changed, Florida had changed, and they probably painted 200,000 paintings.
Oh my gosh.
These are all, I know, it's phenomenal. 26 artists. I had only 8 or 10 of them were full-time.
Okay.
Others came and went, some had other jobs, 3 of them were school teachers. But they saturated the east coast of Florida and inland. And come 1980, the business goes dormant, and the paintings are basically considered garbage. I've had so many reports of people finding them on trash heaps, people moving into a house, and there's 2 stuck behind the water heater. And in 1995, when Jim Fitchie coined the term Highwaymen, they were nameless during their run. Wrote an article, and that sort of started the stampede. It started slowly, of course, and these paintings were $25 or $35 for the bigger ones when they were new, and suddenly they're $300, $500,000, and people think, what on earth is going on? And one of the collectors in the show recently spent $50,000 on one Harold Newton painting.
Oh my God!
And I should point out Harold Newton's in a class of his own, but it's quite a phenomenon. It's quite a story. It's not just a Florida story; it's an American story.
So they didn't have a name for themselves when they were painting. Right?
They were 20-somethings, no offense.
Yeah.
and they just had, you think about it, they're Black kids in Fort Pierce, but Alfred Hair has just got this incredible charisma and this energy. He just went about painting to be a millionaire, and he invited his friends and family to paint alongside of him, and there was never a movement as such. It was spontaneous combustion. And they had no name, they had no organization, no rules, no dues, nothing. Just this like-mindedness. And if it was competitive, it was a spirited competitiveness. They weren't, out to outdo each other, other than to have more fun and have more money to set up the bars or go to the high life times. So you have these kids, and these 20, 23-year-olds in the early 1960s driving Cadillacs.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, yes, setting up bars.
So hugely successful.
It was hugely successful. Yeah, it was unfathomable.
So what was their sales technique, or how did they?
That's well, they had the audacity of hope a long time ago. They again, I just try to envision it. They would take their paintings to area businesses, be it doctors or lawyers' offices, the old telephone companies, the hardware store, real estate offices, wherever there was people that had an extra $25, and they would knock on the door. May I please show you my paintings? And business just boomed. And at $25, even though back then people said they were cheap paintings, they were affordable paintings. Because in 1960, $25 bought you groceries and filled up your gas tank for a week.
Do we want to look at another?
Sure.
Yeah. I think this one might be another Alfred Hair. So we have Alfred Hair and Harold Newton. They're really the founders.
Yeah, it's a good point. Harold Newton was, this is an Alfred Hair painting. Harold Newton was painting before Alfred came along. Alfred was still in high school. He's a self-taught painter with an incredible ability to paint with fidelity. He just painted beautifully with God-given talent. He saw what Bacchus was doing. He realized what scenes were marketable. And he's a very laid-back guy. He made paintings and he fed his family, happy-go-lucky. And Alfred comes along and he sees that. He sees Bacchus, and he does the same thing, but at warp speed. And of course, by painting so quickly, he changes the nature of the genre of landscape painting. This is, as you can see, this whole wall are poinciana trees. And if you live above about Vero Beach and not familiar with them, they grow in South Florida in the tropics, and they become a favorite motif among collectors. And then occasionally, the artists would include a person in the paintings.
Yeah,
And,
so this one is unique because you don't see a lot of
You don't see a
people.
lot of it. And here's where I get I'm friends with all the collectors now, but I get a little pushback. I argue that at the heart of these paintings is the untouched landscape, and that bringing people or accoutrements into the scene changes the dynamic of it. But I think that the collectors gravitate toward them because they're scarce. And
Well, they have a narrative quality to
exactly.
them, right?
Well, they border on genre painting too.
They do, absolutely, absolutely. But so we've got a lot of royal poincianas in this area right here. So
And
this
again,
is
see how differently each one is treated. They're not
Absolutely.
They're not knockout paintings.
yeah. So that's a good point. Like there's a lot of similar motifs that are brought, but each one is very stylistically different. And the handling of materials.
You know, they were alive and they were in the moment. They were really painting. They weren't just knocking out product. And they cared about, we talk about now the value of the paintings or the backstory of them being African Americans in the shadow of Jim Crow. But they were also serious artists. I mean, they cared about their craft, and they made some beautiful paintings along the way.
That's another great point. So there's a difference between, I love history museums, but there's a difference between seeing these works in a history museum, isn't there?
Yes.
And seeing it in an art museum. And so as a curator, were you thinking about that when you were
The reason I
constructing
stuck
the
with
show?
this for 20 some odd years now was to see this work recognized at the Atlanta Museum of Art or another top shelf Florida art museum. And it worked out, of course, here. And I'm glad that it did because your staff is so wonderful. I wanted it to be recognized as fine paintings, interesting art, and not just because there were Black kids who did good or because they're pretty scenes of Florida, but that they're painted in an interesting manner that means something to those of us that appreciate high art.
Yeah.
It's been an uphill battle.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yes,
And so where was your involvement? When did you get started with it?
It's a wrong turn off of I-95 at Fort Pierce. I should have bought a red Porsche. That's been 23 years, I think.
Okay.
And I was going to include this in another book that I was writing about outsider art in Florida, and my publisher, University Press of Florida, said, this is a book in its own right. And they were correct. So I stuck with it, and 5 books later on the highway.
Yeah.
After this book, I did a book on Harold Newton, because this was basically the Alfred Hair story, the first book was. And then I did a Newton book, and then Al Black, who was a salesman turned painter and a very colorful character, was in prison. So I had to go to the Central Florida Reception Center, which is a prison. I thought it was a place you bought tickets for Disney World or Universal. It's a clearinghouse prison here in Orlando. And in the prison, the warden lets him paint murals. He painted 90 murals and just changed the whole place.
Wow.
He made it a place where inmates and security guard talked in reverential tones about life and meaning. And it was just a wonderful icing on the cake. So I did a book about that. And then I was done. And Mary Ann Carroll, the only highway woman, who I became very, very close with, said, write a book about me. I said, you have no idea what you're asking. Because I've been a good friend. I said, one of my best. And I said, but I can't do another one since I'm a photographer. I just want to get back to my Leica camera and wandering the world aimlessly. And then my publisher says a week later, would you write a book about Mary Ann Carroll's house trapped? And then I thought I was done. And then I just said, I got to do a book about Alfred Hair because he is the story. He is the originator of this genre of painting. And that book comes out next month.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you.
How many?
I'm glad it's over.
I feel like that. So how many were there? How many in this group?
Gosh. I get in trouble for this. No good deed. In the end notes of the first book, The Highwaymen, I explained, I'm responsible for the list of artists.
Yes.
There's 26 by my count. And it's a very generous list. And I wrote that I would rather err in favor of inclusivity then either make a mistake or being accused of structuring any sort of political parameters that were exclusive. So I counted 26. It's very liberal, but there's really only 8 artists that are central to the aesthetic and to the modus operandi of selling. And the selling, because of the speed, affected the aesthetics. But there's only 8 that are.
And do we have all 8 in this show?
We do.
Oh, good.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
So we've looked at Alfred.
Then I made sure. Well,
yeah.
When I curated, I went to the 5 collectors, and I wanted this to reflect their sensibilities because they're the ones that are making this phenomenon
Absolutely
live on. And they, by and large, had the most beautiful examples, not the ones that were most germane to Highwaymen art, but I did make sure that they had all of the 8 key painters in the show.
Yeah. So we've looked at Alfred Hair.
Yep.
We've seen some Royal Poincianas. Do we want to look at another artist?
Is there Harold Newton coming up?
Do we want to, just real quick, like maybe look at some of these
Well,
Harold
yeah.
Newtons? I mean, these are stunning to me. I always spend, because there's a lot of variety in Harold's work.
Harold Newton was a phenomenon. As I said, he was in a class of his own. The other artists looked up to him. It was said that even back then, before this was anything, people were calling his paintings Newtons. I'm going to buy a Newton.
Oh.
He was in a league of his own, selling to the area businesses between Vero Beach and Fort Pierce and inland, going to Daytona Beach and Orlando. And he just had that incredible ability to paint vividly and with great fidelity. And all the other artists looked up to him, and they just were in awe of his abilities. That's why most of the paintings are somewhat folksy in comparison. But man, he just rivaled Bacchus in terms of his technical abilities.
So I noticed this frame is also different. Is there a story about some of these frames? Because there's lots of similarities around.
The artists framed their paintings when they sold them. It was a necessity. Not only things look better when they're framed, of course, but they were always wet. The oils had never dried. So because they used standard size boards, they had standard size frames, which allowed the paintings to nest one in the other, so they could take them on the road without damaging the one behind it. So it was functional. And they would buy carpenter's trim at 7 or 9 cents a foot at the lumber yard and cut that down and paint it generally white, and then take some gold and streak it to antique it. And, but
so everything was very entrepreneurial.
It was marketing 101. I mean, it's brilliant. And even the board, the sizes, there's 4 standard sizes. And it's because the Upson board that they purchased at the lumberyard to paint on, they couldn't afford or want to spend the money on canvas. Came in 4-foot by 8-foot sheets. They figured out waste-free sizes to cut it. So it yielded 4 of the signature sizes that were 2 by 3 feet, and the remainder piece was 2 by 4 feet, which is one of the standard sizes, or that was cut down to 18 by 24, or 12 by 24s. And of course, the 12 by 24s were sold as a diptych. So who would buy just one? So they get their money coming and going. So,
oh wow!
And of course, when they were purchased, they were not wired, because the wire would have scraped the paint off the painting behind it. And some of the paintings would carry a tackle box or a toolbox and wire the frame for hanging right there.
Just wire on the go.
Everything's custom.
Oh my God! Everything was custom. I love that. Wow, they really knew how to sell their work.
And they were differential. They were, whatever one's understandings are about African American culture, I don't pretend to know it at all. But I spent a lot of time in Lincoln Park, which is the Black community of Fort Pierce, during a rough era too. And I was welcome. I was treated with respect, with interest and curiosity, and I learned about the community. It was a stellar community in the 1940s, 50s. It was on the Chitlin circuit of Black entertainers. It had a stellar school system, it had churches galore, and very strong family values. And the children were raised with discipline and respect. And it comes across in how they sold their paintings. And they also had a sense of self-pride and worth that was instilled in them from growing up. And I spoke to hundreds of people that lived there, and it was a common denominator. Good people that worked hard, studied. Some of them did this.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, just an incredible legacy.
And it's a visual legacy of modern Florida.
Yeah.
As unlikely as it is, it came together. If you trace it backwards, it makes a good sense, but it can never have been prophesized,
No. Do we want to look at the...
Of course. You know, there were 5 painters that are core or central to this phenomenon. Roy is one of them. And for those of you that are interested or studying the paintings, it was Alfred Hair, Roy McClendon, James Gibson, Livingston Roberts. Roy worked as a migrant as a youngster, also drew and painted. And as he got older, he did more and more painting. And when Alfred gets this atelier going of sorts, he's in business too, just cranking out the most gorgeous Florida landscapes. This is a very general motif that he painted. And there's probably a few others in the exhibition of the similar motif with the pine trees and the fallen log and the water birds. But everyone, again, is painted in the moment and very much refined, especially in his work. And you see he has some with people as well. I think he and Harold painted the most with people in them.
And you mentioned already that they painted outside in their backyards, that these are imagined landscapes, you would say,
Largely. You know, yeah, I asked Livingston Roberts about that once. And he said, you know, I know this landscape. I was born here, I grew up here. And he said he still, this is 20 years ago, he said, I still drive into the countryside a few times during the year to see how the grass changes color.
Huh.
So I think they were very sensitive and aware of what they were doing. They knew the landscape. But you're right, they painted out of their imaginations, but having experienced it.
So because many of them were natives. Were they natives?
Yeah, growing up there. They knew the land, they played there, they worked there, they toiled there. And they had a sensitivity to paint with this grace.
I mean, this is Florida on a really good day, though, right? Like, this is Florida. This is the Florida I want to live in. It's lush, it's beautiful, it's vibrant.
No comment.
Yeah, it's not my reality on a day to day, but it is.
And they're fantasy scapes too.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's an interesting way of putting it, actually.
I mean, it's what we dream about when we dream about Florida. It's what drew people here in great numbers after the Second World War to start afresh, and they all needed paintings.
Yeah. They also had air conditioning for the first time, right? So that would have been.
On the other hand, a lot of Northerners that came down and never experienced mosquitoes or
Oh my gosh.
So they painted to assuage those feelings also.
We're going to look at the Willie Daniels. So there's 100 in this show. You curated exactly 100.
20 from each collection.
20 from each collection. And it's the biggest exhibition of Highwaymen art?
Yeah, and the finest of their paintings.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because you're really it's driven by the collectors, right? Didn't you allow them to choose some? That's pretty amazing.
Oh, I did it on my own. It would be a very different show. But I wanted it to reflect their values and their interests because ultimately they're the taste makers.
Sure, absolutely.
Just report the facts.
Who was really buying these in the 60s, though? I mean,
people that wanted deck wall coverings, decorative art.
Okay.
And as I said, they weren't really cherished by most people.
Yeah.
You know, years ago, when this phenomenon started in the late 1990s, you can buy these at garage sales for $3.
Oh my gosh.
Or less. I know, and there are pickers galore, you know, scouring the state at thrift stores and flea markets, etc., trying to find them. And back then, it was like picking low-hanging fruit, but not no more. This is a Willie Daniels, who was sort of in the second tier, a little younger, and kind of a hybrid between Alfred Hair and Harold Newton. Had great ability to paint beautifully, but he still had that Alfred Hair dynamic going on. And I think if somebody would ask me to pick out one Highwayman painting to represent the Highwaymen, it would be a Willie Daniels painting.
Really?
Yeah. I think because they're so distinctive. And I think that's what sets the Highwayman art against other arts, that they're so distinctively their own. They're not genre paintings, they're not your typical, here's a pretty picture of Florida. Just beautifully conceived and a lot of soul.
A lot of heart and a lot of soul. So we do have a question. I think we've answered this, but we're going to go ahead. This is somebody who's watching right now. And if you do have a question for Gary while he's here, please comment in the comment feed and we'll ask it live. So the question was, is there a locations list of locales that the Highwaymen painted available in your books? Did they paint any national locations?
It's a good question. No, there aren't, because although many of them are inspired by the St. Lucie River in that region, they didn't paint, they were not easel painters going on location. So they basically took their ideas from what they observed, but there's no, except for some of the genre paintings, like there's a couple of cityscapes in the exhibition, but the landscape paintings are semi-imaginary, inspired by the real experiences. And they did not paint outside of this region. It's said that Alfred Hair was visiting his wife when she was a student at Florida A&M in Tallahassee, and she had told me that he would paint Florida landscapes, but they wouldn't sell up there. They'd come down here and sell these tropical versions, and he wasn't too interested in painting the different kind of landscape up there. So they're just germane to the subtropical Florida landscape.
Beautiful. I don't see any other questions for the time being. Are there any other pieces in here that we want to take a look?
No, there's just 100
I mean,
beautiful.
there's just 100.
I think that's Sam Newton over here is exquisite.
Oh, wow.
Harold Newton had two brothers that were aspiring painters, and Sam stuck with it and is a very successful independent painter still today. But this is perhaps the most sublime and beautiful of his paintings I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely.
He's going strong.
So we have the 8 kind of core highwaymen.
Yeah.
But I get this question a lot when I do tours. People will find them like online, or is there like a list or a website or anything like resources for people that are interested in collecting
but
this
a lot of them
work?
online are not too accurate.
Got you. Yeah.
But you can find the list of the 26 online. Just poke around a little bit.
Okay.
And again, it takes some studying to know who's who.
Absolutely.
In the food chain. And then, of course, people often confuse the what are called legacy painters and second generation painters
Okay.
with the original highwaymen, where they fall in the scheme of things. It takes a little bit of study.
Gotcha. So are the second generation they're your children then? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Relatives and
Relatives.
the legacy painters are painters that have picked up on the themes and the style of painting. They're new. It spawned industries.
Gotcha. Oh, absolutely. Oh man. So they paint through about the 1980s. You said they saturate the market.
Yeah, in the early 80s, it goes dormant and nothing until they're named the Highwaymen, dubbed the Highwaymen, about 15 years later, and suddenly that started this cadre of collectors who are scouring, and it just grew and grew and grew, and it went from garage sales to flea markets to thrift stores to antique stores, and then to history museums and community centers and libraries, and finally to major Florida art museums, with this show being the pinnacle.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Getting the recognition that they rightfully deserve.
For sure. Yeah, and they're living to enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, Gary, this has been so fun for me. Thank you.
My
I hope
pleasure.
that people have been enjoying the live stream. We are going to save this onto our Facebook and YouTube. The show is up through August 16th. We have many safety measures and protocols in place, so I encourage you to check out our website, omart.org, to learn more about those. We have a date night coming up this Saturday. We're hoping to get more people here to see this remarkable exhibition that Gary has curated. So for more information about that, please check out our website, follow us on social media. Thank you for watching. Oh, I always forget, you can't see I'm smiling.